Hello, and welcome to a first edition of the Making the Turn podcast featuring the Dooch and Double D, where we talk all things golf and how it relates to golfers out there in this space trying to figure out how they can possibly play better golf. And man, are we excited to have this first episode because it's coming right on the heels, not even an hour removed from the finish of this edition of our Ryder Cup, where we saw that the Europeans were able to make good and finish off the Americans on day 3, which looked pretty good and thorough from the beginning. And the score probably got a little closer than they would have liked, but they definitely saw it through. So without further ado, let's talk to my partner out there, the man with the plan, the guy over in the UK, and absolutely one of my favorite writers on the entire planet, Mr. Dan Davies, or as I like to call him, Double D. Double D, what's going on?
Well, Dooch, I'm emotionally strung out after that final day of the Ryder Cup. I mean, it always does that to you, doesn't it? I mean, whatever the outcome, it just has this way of putting you through the emotional ringer. And as a fan of Team Europe and as somebody who's been watching these matches since, the mid to early 80s, that was, even though the score at the end, 16.5, 11.5 to Europe, which I think reflected the overall play. It was really tight on the last day. It was nerve-wracking, and at points, like it always is on the Sunday singles, there were points where you think this is getting away from Team Europe. But in the end, they came through, and I think they were very, very worthy winners in the end. And I think that Luke Donald did a fantastic job as captain. I mean, I do think he outclassed Zach Johnson as captain from sort of day one, from the get-go.
Yeah, I don't think there's any dispute about that, which is really concerning because I don't understand how the European team had to make the change in captaincy due to the events with Henrik Stenson joining Liv and them taking that away from him. But, it should have been Europe that felt like maybe they were a little scrambling, but it never felt like they weren't prepared for what was in front of them and what they needed to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely had a plan, didn't they? I mean, I think in Eduardo Molinari, they had a guy who, as Luke said, put together a stats packet for each of the players. They had a definite plan that was based around each of the players' strengths, around how the course was set up. That course was designed specifically for the Ryder Cup, for the 2023 Ryder Cup, and they set it up in a way that played into the strengths of Team Europe. And you're right, Luke Donald had much less of a run-in than Zach Johnson did. But I think since, from day one, from the moment he was appointed, he had a touch of class about him. He looked like he was a leader who had sort of, he was considered, he was intelligent, he made good choices throughout. And I think he wasn't overly emotional as well in the heat of the battle, which I think was important. And I think clearly, you see the reaction at the end of all the players that they had a huge amount of respect for him. And that's massively important as a captain.
But I think he took kind of his playing career right into his captaincy, right? In terms of, a lot of people forget, but there was a point in time where Luke was the #1 player in the world. And, honestly has never been even at tour average in his length. So, Luke has always kind of been in this underdog role, and he's kind of bet on himself, like he alluded to in the interview right after they went official. But, he just kind of, it seemed like, really embraced that underdog role. And I think generally when you see these quote unquote upsets where on paper it doesn't look like it should be much of a match, but when you see these things happen, generally the team that, doesn't have the all-stars, they really have to think about how they're going to beat all of that talent, right? They have to outsmart them. They have to be tricky. It's kind of like going out and playing on a Sunday afternoon, and you obviously are hitting it way better than the 85-year-old gentleman that you're playing with, but he just kind of keeps dinking it down the fairway and popping it on the green and rolling some putts in. That guy's tough to beat, and it wears you out. And on paper, you should beat that guy pretty handedly, yet he finds a way to kind of outsmart you and use some of that veteran wisdom. And I think that that's really what you saw with the Molinari brothers really coming maybe a little bit more so in the spotlight, because I think as an American, a lot of Americans had forgotten about the Molinaris because they've been out of the spotlight as players for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, Eduardo Molinari was a winning Ryder Cup player. I mean, he had the experience of being there. And you're right about Luke Donald. I mean, Luke Donald was probably the last #1 who wasn't a bomber. He was a player who did not, like you say, he was not even anywhere near the top of the driving averages.
No.
But a player who played to his strengths, had a brilliant short game, was a great iron player, was a fantastic putter. I mean, really, for a player like him to go to #1 in the modern era was a superlative achievement. And I think you're right. He did take that strategy, that ability to think around the game in a different way than a multi-dimensional way. He brought that into his captaincy. And I think, with the Molinari brothers, particularly Eduardo, who, is a golf data guru who's looking for the edge all the time. But the US also had access to those sorts of people. They had Scout Consulting who worked with them for the last 2 or 3 Ryder Cups. They had a lot of the same sort of insight. But it just seems that to me
but
that
it's not embraced. It falls on deaf ears, and that's where my bone comes into play with the captaincy, and generally just kind of the PGA's kind of tried and true model of, hey, we got the best players and we think we're the best, so we'll just throw it out there, and Sunday afternoon they'll make it tight because in the singles it gets a lot more difficult for a David versus Goliath scenario to occur. But when we get out there in 4 balls and foursomes, I think that obviously you see that Americans aren't used to playing in that format. And obviously Team Europe always has an advantage there. So I just think it's really blindingly absurd at how traditional we tend to be with how we send our teams to the Ryder Cup. And we generally are ill prepared. A lot of the guys hadn't played in 5 weeks. And then you look at a lot of the picks, and man, if a couple of those things, if the big one, obviously the final dagger was Ricky hitting driver into the middle of the pond. But if we had a few different players down the stretch, that could have been spicy. Like that
yeah,
could have been really spicy, Double D.
yeah, I mean, Cameron Young is obviously the one that people are going to bring up because he's a
No,
brilliant
no, no.
driver of
We're
the
not going
ball.
to talk about Cameron Young. We're going to forget about the fact that we could have potentially had Dustin Johnson out there. We could
Well,
have
yeah,
potentially had Bryson DeChambeau out there.
yeah.
Like,
I mean,
okay, it comes down to a drivable par 4 and Bryson DeChambeau sitting at home and wasn't even given a phone call. Give
well,
me a
very
break.
true. There's
Give me a break.
three drivable par fours on Marco Simone. I mean, they pushed up the fifth, I think it was, to make it drivable. So yeah, and Europe knew that the Americans were better with their wedge game, so they made those par fours drivable. And actually, Europe had a really good record. I mean, strangely, Spieth was the one who actually had the highest birdie percentage when going for a green on a drivable par 4. But Spieth only really brought it on the last day. But it was odd. I mean, I think alarm bells were ringing for Team America, from that very ill-considered press conference that Zach Johnson gave, where
I don't like the fact that the captain's being indignant, and that's the word that stands out to me. I know that there's a lot of people, that you, for example, you are an actual journalist, so you have to watch these things and pay attention. But in the modern age, a lot of us are clicky and we like to read the headlines and move on. But as somebody who actually watched all the matches and woke up extra early here in the United States and then would actually watch the press conferences and read the clippings, the one word that I would use about Captain Johnson is he had a very indignant attitude towards the press and towards any kind of questioning of his captaincy. And I'm here to tell you that when you are a captain who is trying to win something, you should be taking in all information from every angle and trying to use that to come up with a competitive advantage. And for him to kind of be indignant and act like nobody has a right to question him because he's the captain, I just think that's a farce.
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing, he was asked about the analytics, wasn't he? He was asked about, what was America going to do to counter, the impact Dodo Molinari had on the European side. And, the Europeans were from the outset going to be very analytics driven. They were going to look at where they could find the edge, because obviously the world rankings, proved that the Americans had the stronger side. I mean, actually, in terms of form coming in, Europe had the best 3 players in Hatton. In Hovland, Hatton, and McIlroy. They were on form
And
coming
Sean
in.
Rahm was just unbelievable, like he
And
is in
Rahm,
every rider.
yeah, I mean, Rahm was having was struggling a little bit before he came into Wentworth, and then he played beautifully at Wentworth. But all 12 players played in the BMW PGA Championship at Wentworth, which is obviously the European Tour, DP World Tour's marquee event. They were there. They were tournament sharpened. There were only 3 members of the Team USA who'd actually played since the Tour Championship, which you alluded to earlier. I mean, they just can't be tournament ready. Whatever, Wyndham Clark is saying about being rested and all that sort of stuff, you have to be tournament sharp you have to be sort of absolutely ready to take that on. And
The
I
nerve
think it's
endings kind of have to be singed a little bit. You know what I mean? Like if you I always tell people, when you're a tour player, like the grief that you take is unreal because every fan that paid their way is going to say something to you at some point during the round. And it's just like, your nerve endings are constantly kind of getting teased and burnt, and you almost kind of have to develop a little bit of that singe at the end of those things to kind of put those blinders on and be ready to go into that octagon. And when you kind of move out of that bubble for a little bit, those nerve endings grow back and you're well rested. But to your point, like you're also very sensitive because you haven't really been out there in a little bit and you kind of forgot a little bit. And to your point, man, I think playing in is just critical. I think that that's really not necessarily that, they should be playing 3 or 4 weeks straight coming in, nothing like that, obviously. But I think, it's 5 weeks since your last competitive round. I think that's probably a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, and I think Max Homer and Justin Thomas played at the Fortinet, which is, a very relaxed stop on the PGA Tour. It's not the sort of high tension, high drama, big stakes of a lot of other tournaments. Whereas,
Yeah.
these guys have played at Wentworth for the biggest title on the European Tour. And
Yeah.
all 12 of them have played, and they'd actually played, they've been grouped together. So that this plan was clearly in place about getting these guys bonded. All 12 of them went out to Marco Simone 2 weeks before the Ryder Cup, or just before the BMW PGA. Only 9 of the 12 from Team America went out to Marco Simone, and there are, reasons have been given for that. But, as Paul McGinley, who is regarded as being one of the best prepared European Ryder Cup captains, said, you've got to take this seriously. You've got to explore every edge you can get. And it seemed to me, and the thing that, as I keep coming back to, when Zach Johnson was asked about what role analytics, what role performance data was going to play in his captaincy, he just
Yeah.
kept
No
on.
answer. Yeah.
He
No
kept on finding
answer.
the answer. It was just like, it's too complicated for me to be able to describe it to you. So, well,
No, it's not.
why don't you try?
Yeah. I really find it's difficult. Like, you know, they constantly talk about heart, like that's the big tagline for the Ryder Cup. It means more. You represent your country, you represent your hometown, you represent the street you grew up with and the people who have been in your life. And that is all true. And that has never rung more true to me than being at the Ryder Cup at Whistling Straits and watching Shane Lowry after they had just taken a thumping by the Americans. He stayed in his match and grinded it out, and on 18 made a putt, and I cannot remember who to beat. But just to see the reaction from Shane and the people with him, even though they had just taken an absolute drubbing, I mean, it shows you what it means to the Europeans to win a point and to say that they have a winning record at the Ryder Cup. I mean, it truly is special. But I really find it difficult to believe that it all comes down to heart in this thing. And don't get me wrong, I think that heart is a big part of it. And I think when it comes to the Ryder Cup and dealing with the emotions is an additional piece. But you can't tell me it's all about the heart. There has to be substance there too, Double D. Like you've got to have a plan and then go after the heart. I mean, here's my
Well, listen.
theory.
Well,
Okay.
look at what happened in the foursomes. I mean, that's the perfect case in point. Is the foursomes Europe 1-7-1? And the fact that they chose to play foursomes first because they knew they'd have an advantage in that, so they wanted to build a lead. If you look at how many times, either side won the first hole to actually establish momentum. I mean, I think it was Europe was won the first hole 10 times. I think the USA won it 4 times, and they didn't win it once until the third session on the second, the fourth session on the second day.
Right.
So they hadn't got to a point where they were sort of like coming out of the traps, putting red on the board, and actually that psychological impact of being able to do that. And that I think is all about taking care of the details, and it's the small details that then compound to become bigger impacts on the overall performance. And I think you're right. I think that
But these
there.
stats that you're talking about aren't details either, right? So like when you say stats, it's like, okay, how did they use the stats to help them? Because a lot of people don't really use stats and don't understand them. But for example, they've alluded a bunch to this massive anomaly they found between 180 and 220 yards, right? They knew that they had a significant advantage at that yardage that the Americans did not have, quite frankly, because the Americans never have that yardage on the PGA Tour. So the big thing that they would do is that they would literally force you to play shots from this distance. They set the par threes to those lengths. They grew
Yeah.
the grass in. I mean, Marco Simone looks like a completely different golf course than it did originally because of the way they changed this golf course to give them an advantage. And to the point of stats, they went as too far as to actually go in and change some of the grasses around the golf course because they knew that that was going to level with the thick, wide blade. They knew that the players weren't going to be able to spin the ball nearly as much. And they kept talking about how the Americans had such an advantage with the wedges. Well, how do you take away some of that advantage? Well, you give them really rough grass around the greens. It's kind of difficult to manage. And now everybody loses a little bit, and that brings their advantage back to, I mean, that's really using stats. But once again, that's starting using those stats way beforehand and really building a plan. And that's just quite frankly what we don't do as Americans. We show up and think our talent's going to get it done. We have a
Well,
history of doing it in other sports.
yeah, the golf course was really almost like the 13th man for Team Europe. They really did create that golf course, not only for match play. And I thought it turned out to be a fantastic match play golf course. I really did. And the Marco Simone came in for a lot of criticism before the tournament. People were saying the rough's too long and all this sort of stuff. And it's another sort of faceless Ryder Cup venue. But I thought it was a superb Ryder Cup venue. I thought it produced fantastic drama. I thought it framed some amazing moments and some amazing shots. I mean, hole 16, I mean, how many times on that short par four did we see sort of outrageous shots from, people chipping in, even on the last day, like Sepp Straka's chip in, or, Tommy Fleetwood's tee shot there to actually find that green and to find the back of that green after his opponent had put it in the water. I mean, there was just so much that was dialed in to Europe's strengths and understanding those strengths. And it wasn't just about driving accuracy. I mean, Europe had a very slight edge over the US at driver length, at 3-wood length, and at probably long iron hybrid length, but it wasn't significant. But actually, and Europe had a team that was longer hitters than they've had before. I mean, traditionally, the US has been a longer hitting side. But like you say, they knew that Europe had strengths and had advantages in different areas, and they set up the golf course and they told the players, this was the plan, this is what we've done, this is how we've created an opportunity for you to find that edge and exploit it. And they did it. I mean, and the fact that, a lot of those players had played in Italian Opens before. It's a tough course. It's been, for the last 3 years, it's been a really tough venue for players on the European tour. So they were getting people into the feeling, into the mindset, into what was going to be required to really play well on that course. And I think that Dave Sampson, who is the course architect for Marco Simone, deserves a lot of credit. He certainly faced a few brickbats in the build up with people criticizing the course, but I think it was a fantastic.
The course played beautifully. I thought it played beautifully. I really did. I thought it was great. I mean, even from an American standpoint, like it didn't feel linksy. It didn't feel, like some of these other Ryder Cups that have been in Europe have felt, to where it's like, oh, they got a mass. No, it felt like, everybody played. I thought the play was at a high level across the board with both sides. Obviously, some of the players that hadn't been there before struggled a bit with the pressure, but I definitely think that the golf course played well, and I think not only that, but it was good theater. If you look at the way the golf course is designed and the way that the slopes are utilized and the way that the golf course, the design actually fits the topography, it creates a lot of these kind of nice big bowl features, and you could just see it at the end with how many people were packed in around every hole, man. It was beautiful. So I think that was awesome.
Yeah, the scene on the 16th, I mean, it was just
absurd.
The crowds were absolutely enormous. And I was listening to a podcast this morning. I think Max Homer was saying that this is just the best tee box I've ever been on. You're looking down, it's completely ringed by these massive crowds. But they designed that golf course for the spectators. They designed it for the Ryder Cup. They knew there was going to be this enormous number of people who wanted to actually be able to follow the action and see the action and also create that atmosphere. And I think one thing I feel about the Ryder Cup is I love the sort of tribalism. I love the atmosphere, which is unique to the Ryder Cup. But I don't. Yeah. I really
Rory's
don't appreciate.
Fired up, man. Like Rory's having to be thrown in the back of a car because he's all wound up. Like, I mean, you don't see Rory getting that way at the PGA.
But that's great. All that sort of stuff, it shows the passion. But I really do feel quite strongly. I don't like people shouting out, "Hit it in the water." You're a cheat, all this sort of stuff. There's always a few sort of people that let the vast majority down. I think you can cheer your team. You can absolutely, you can sing, you can chant them onto the tees.
Yeah.
You can have huge eruptions of joy.
It's a byproduct of being in the sun all day and having a few too many sodas. I mean, it's unfortunate, man.
What's it going to be
I,
like at Bethpage in 2 years? I mean, everybody's
unreal.
saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really I don't like the fact that we bait these things to happen. Like the PGA wants to see, bedlam when it comes to the Ryder Cup in 2025, because obviously that makes, Twitter, now known as X, and, Instagram and everything go crazy, due to that. But at the end of the day, man, like, I think it's like anything. These things happen, right? Like, somebody says something they shouldn't say, they're a little overserved, somebody dives in the water, but it's always unfortunate because we let these things go too far, and then somebody gets hurt, and then we say, well, we didn't see that coming. No, we tried to make that come. Like, we set that up. We set that whole
Yeah.
situation up. So I just hope that they do something, because golf is one of those sports and one of those games that really can be affected by somebody from the outside. And I certainly hope we would never have a Ryder Cup come down to something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there was, and I don't know whether this was true, but somebody shining their cell phone torch on somebody's ball when they were teeing off and things like that. I mean, you're already starting to see this coming in with gambling and things like this. People, I mean, especially the Ryder Cup when you got 12 singles matches. I mean, the gambling opportunities for that are, enormous on the last day and actually on the
Yeah.
first 2 days as well. But you don't want that to sort of overstep the mark. I think partisanship is absolutely fine. The atmosphere of the Ryder Cup is totally unique. It's more like a British football match than it is a golf tournament.
Feels like you're going
It's
into a heavyweight fight, I mean, it really does. It has big energy. It feels like a big football game. It feels like rugby, cricket. I'm sure, I haven't been to a cricket match with Double D yet, but he's promising to take me to one, and I hear the energy is pretty good there. So,
Well, cricket
but
cricket's quite genteel. If you come over to the UK next time, Dooch, I'll take you to a football match and we'll
all right.
what the proper football, not what you Americans call football. But like, and I know that there's great atmospheres at US sports as well, and that's why the
But
players are
it's over
so
the line a lot too. We
yeah.
have that problem. We celebrate the Buffalo Bills fan base, the Bills Mafia, because they jump through tables, and you know what I mean? Like, it definitely, and we'll have this conversation down the road. And that's the beautiful thing about this podcast and making the turn, is that it affords us the opportunity to really look at a lot of things. But I think part of making the turn with golf is we've seen that there's a lot more of this football crowd that's very kind of in your face, and we won and you lost. We see that really making its way to the golf course in droves. So, that is my concern, is that how much of golf's tradition will kind of move on to the next generation, because I think it's what you see more across the board in general at any sporting event.
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't, there was in the UK on the coverage on TV, there was a lot of trailing of the Nicholas Jacklin Award, the concession award about, sportsmanship. And
Yeah.
Justin Rose won it in the end, which is fine because he's a consummate
My
sportsman. He's
favorite
great.
golfer of all time. It's not close.
There wasn't really a moment, and I thought maybe it was Ricky Fowler because I was really surprised that he gave that putt to Tommy Fleetwood on the 16th, which effectively sealed the game. I think there was a bit of meat on that bone. I wouldn't have given that putt. And I
Not a
was
3-footer to win the Ryder Cup.
yeah, downhill 3-footer. I was thinking, when it was so in the balance, I was really surprised he gave that putt. And I was thinking, well, maybe he's looking to win something this week, and it's the Jacqueline Nicholas Award. But yeah, I mean,
I
it
kind
went
of
to Justin
thought
Rose
to
in the end.
myself, for a guy that you wonder about under the gun sometimes, and my hat's off to him, because the last time he was under the gun, he paid it off at the Rocket Mortgage. So, maybe he's different this way. But when I think of Ricky, man, and I thought this to myself a lot coming down the stretch, a lot of those guys were really squirrely under the gun. And,
Yeah.
you're talking about late matches, and you're possibly a late match because coach didn't think it was going to matter when it came down to you. And it's like those just, I get it. In the first couple matches, you got your rock stars out there, with the exception of Scotty kind of really making a mess with the putter every now and then. Those guys are pretty rock solid. But to your point, man, 3.5 feet downhill to win the Ryder Cup in front of an awful lot of people. Whoo! I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd give
No,
that one away.
yeah, I was surprised by that. But also, you look at Jordan Spieth. I mean, he was put out 12. If Europe were going, if the US were going to win the Ryder Cup, they needed a really strong anchoring there. Of course, they needed to get red on the board. Of course, they needed to get off to a really fast start. But actually, the player who'd played the worst all week by any metric you look at, the player who was in the worst form coming in by quite a long way, and we looked at the data, the clip data on that, and you could see that, Jordan Spieth was struggling coming in. And obviously, we're only looking back at his last performance, which was 5 weeks ago. So we don't know quite what he's done in the meantime, but nothing over
Sure.
nothing over the first 2 days suggested he was on great form. And okay, he pulled it out. He played it. It was an incredible match with Lowry, and we didn't see a lot of it because it was sort of
But
buried
Lowry
at the end
wasn't
of
in
the
good
order.
form either, in fairness to Shane, right? Like, I
No,
mean, he hasn't been in great form either.
no, but they apparently they just shot the lights out in the last match. But it was interesting, again looking at that order that Zach Johnson put out, that he had, to your point, a lot of players who weren't really playing particularly well at the bottom. Maybe Justin Thomas, they're thinking, okay, we can trust his Ryder Cup pedigree. He's a fighter. He's somebody who's going to pull it out, and sure enough, he did. But yeah, it was just that there were so many strange decisions, I thought, from Zach Johnson, and a lot of them have been commented on. But the pairings on the first day, putting out Ricky Fowler when he wasn't feeling well. I mean, why do that? And the Spieth Thomas pairing just wasn't, it
I
wasn't
just don't
working.
think we had the right. I mean, I don't think that the U.S. team had the. I think that the whole system is kind of flawed, and my point that I was going to make a little bit earlier, but I'll just go ahead and say now is that, as an American, I love my country and I support the American teams, obviously, but it's embarrassing. It's just absolutely embarrassing that, for us to have that big of an advantage on paper and then to not even really make it close, because if we're being honest, I think it got a little snug at the end, or more so than people expected it to. But for the most part, like, I was really hoping that the European team would come out and just trounce us this morning, because I think, very similar to what happened after Whistling Straits, I really think we need to look at the people who are putting together the processes that lead to who gets selected for the captaincy and who's going to be involved with helping that captain, and what kind of systems are we going to put in place to make sure we pick the right people. Because quite frankly, as I alluded to earlier, Dustin Johnson, Bryson DeChambeau not being there, like you said, Cameron Young, another really world-class player, not there. It's like, I get it. We love the storylines, and we love, that we have all these pictures of Ricky, Jordan, and JT all together when they were young, and how cute is that? And it's an easy story to sell. But at the end of the day, I don't know that what they did this past year really, with the exception of Jordan Spieth, I don't know what the other two really did this year to earn that spot. I know that Ricky's an amazing story and came back from, it looked like off the grid to win, but that's a wonderful story. But like, what did he do the rest of the year? Like,
Yeah,
how
but
did he earn?
it feels to me a bit like the power was in the hands of the players too much. The players, the sort of caucus of players that made up the Team USA had the casting vote. And Sam Burns, he played okay, but he was there on the pick of Scotty Scheffler almost certainly, wasn't he? I mean, yes, he won the World Match Play this year, and that's a good sort of tick in his column. But he was there to partner Scotty Scheffler, and that didn't really work, did it?
It's kind of
And
funny. We have this thing called like we have elite travel basketball teams here in the US. And these teams, it's kind of funny because they move on and go play high school basketball or college basketball. And like, the kids that are on the team will only work with the other kids that they've been on teams with before. Like, they won't
yeah,
pass the ball to the, you know what I mean? And it does feel that way, right? It feels like this is kind of a crew that grew up kind of playing all this high level junior golf together. And like, they're kind of like, well, now that we're here, let's just keep it to us. And they don't let any of the other kids, on the bus.
yeah, and there was a lot of commentary around that, wasn't there? And
Yeah.
people have come out to defend the team, saying that wasn't the case. But Bryson DeChambeau is one of the most informed players in the world at the moment. And like you say, on a golf course with 3 drivable par fours, a short par five in 12, and with that sort of prodigious length, he's going to have a big advantage.
Yeah, and then
Um,
Dustin Johnson, you want to talk about having the
we
right
went,
stuff?
yeah,
I
he
mean,
went
who's
five and
played
zero
in more?
last. He went 5-0 at the Whistling Straits. I mean,
I mean, you really, he's not even good enough to get a phone call. Like, I mean, dude, it's just laughable at what we're putting out there. And then my hat's off, I'm not saying that we put out such a bad product that we lost the Ryder Cup. That's not true at all. As a matter of fact, what happened was the European team put together such a good plan that they couldn't be beat with an ensemble cast of some of the best players in the world. And I don't want to take anything at all away from what Team Europe did. But with all that being said, still, I feel like it could have been potentially different. and certainly a different outcome than it was had we had a captain that was more involved in looking at actual performance instead of storylines.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dilemma of being a Ryder Cup captain is if you win, you're a hero. If you don't, you're nowhere. And then the sort of inquest starts afterwards. And I think after a 16 and a half, 11 and a half defeat on the back of a 17-11 win that was meant to be the opening of a new epoch for the Ryder Cup in the for US Ryder Cup teams, that's a big step back. That's a really big sort of backward step. And I think that, you made a really good point. Team Europe played superbly for 3 days, particularly for the first 3 sessions. There was always going to be a change in momentum at some point because playing that level of golf is tiring. Not that I've got any experience of it whatsoever, but I've watched enough Ryder Cup golf to know that. And I
How
was
many
at
holes do you think you've walked with Seve?
I don't know, many. But
Many.
what I
But
was
when
going to, what
he's in contention, how much energy do you feel around that?
Oh, enormous. Yeah. I mean,
And like,
he became a
right,
different
but to
sort of
do that
animal.
at the Ryder Cup, to your point, right? Like to exude that amount of energy to be in those moments, like Seve was, and you were there and you could feel it, and like I could feel it with Tiger on 18 at Augusta. Like, I mean, it just literally sucks the energy out of everything else. And to your point, there is absolutely no way to play 5 matches and sustain that same level for all 5. There's just no way.
I was at Brookline in '99 and watched all 3 days of that. And it was, it was a very similar pattern to what played out today. Europe were imperious for the first 2 days. They built a big lead. But then America came out on that last day. Team USA came out on that last day and they started putting red on the board. And once you can change that momentum, once you can sow that seed, once you can, just plant that doubt in the opposition mind, and also that and capitalize on the fact that a team had played their hearts out, had literally played so well over the first 2 days, and they were tired. There's no doubt about it. And obviously, there were mistakes made by Mark James, who was the European captain that year. He didn't put out, Andrew Coulthard. He didn't put out Yarmo Sandlin until the singles. They hadn't played, and Andrew Coulthard went out against Tiger Woods at Brookline. I mean, what chance have you got? But I was there on the 17th when Justin Leonard hold that putt against Jose
Were you
Maria.
really?
Yeah,
That's crazy.
I was up a tree being shouted at by sort of Massachusetts police
Not
officer.
the first time you've been shouted at from being up a tree, right?
Well, certainly by American police officer. But it was an extraordinary, and it was a really febrile atmosphere that day. I mean, that was the time that I remember really thinking, even post Kiowa, that the Ryder Cup has really changed. And now this is really hostile and going to play away. And maybe that template had been set by what happened at Kiowa. But going to play away was walking into the sort of lion's den. It was entering the bear pit. But what happened on that day, and I did fear a little bit for Europe today. I did fear that if Team USA started getting red on the board, started sort of build leads, but over the first 2 days, I think it wasn't until the third session on the second session rather on day 2, the 4 balls, that Team USA had held a lead of 3 up in any game. 2 up was the biggest lead they'd built. And, as we know, Europe won the foursome 7-1. They were miles ahead after 2 days. So they just never had that ability to put the foot down and actually move clear and actually start to send that sort of that pulse of anxiety through the other team. And that's what happened at Brookline. And the result was a phenomenal comeback by Team USA, just as it was at Medina, for the miracle of Medina. It can happen. So there is precedent for that. But it just seemed that the American players couldn't really put their foot to the floor, couldn't hit the gas in a sufficient way. And also Europe had those totems in John Rahm, Rory McIlroy, Tyrrell Hatton, who had a fantastic Ryder Cup, who was unbeaten, 3.5 out of 4 points. Rory 4 out of 5. Hovland was just fantastic. And Rahm as well, of course. I mean, some of the golf shots he hit were just extraordinary. And we talk about Seve, and I heard an interview with Rahm afterwards in which he talked about how Jose Maria Lazabal had said to him, I think after one of the matches on Saturday, he said, "You reminded me of somebody today," and he was doing stuff that was otherworldly. It was superhuman, some of the stuff he was doing. But
Can I tell you my theory about John Rahm that I don't think anybody else has ever said? Here's my theory on John Rahm. Okay, you remember the movie Major League?
Yeah.
with Charlie Sheen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's in Major League, right? Do you remember they had the hitter that hadn't had any hits all season, and he would pray to Jobu, and he was giving him like live chickens and whiskey and everything, and like praying to Jobu. Like I'm convinced that they just bring all the Sevi stuff out, and that's like them praying to the spirit of Sevi, come inside of John Rahm, because there is zero doubt in my mind that John Rahm has encapsulated and embodied Sevi Ballesteros. And just during the Ryder, like that shot he hit on 17 to end it yesterday was just absolutely mind-boggling good. I mean,
Yeah.
that golf ball tried to turn three different directions in the middle of the shot, and like it was just willed to go. I'm surprised it didn't go in. That was the surprising part about that shot, is that it didn't go in the hole.
Yeah. He
Um,
was he was just incredible throughout. I mean, I lost count of how many otherworldly golf shots John Rahm hit during it. He was a man inspired, and I think he mentioned Seve after winning the Masters. Seve is obviously a huge influence on him on Spanish golf, but on European golf. I mean, that generation of players that Seve led. I mean, he played in the Ryder Cup, in the '83 Ryder Cup in PGA National, where Europe came really, really close, and he hit one of the greatest shots of all time that sadly was never captured on television because the telecast hadn't started, and he was in the first match out against Fuzzy Zeller and hit a 3-wood out of a fairway bunker from 240 yards up near the lip with a Tony Penner persimmon 3-wood, and just carved this ball, got it to turn in the air like 40 yards and found a green guarded by water and managed to make a 5. And that was his third shot because he hacked his second into a bunker from thick rough. I mean, the guy was capable of pulling out these shots in the moment, when the moment called for it. And
yep.
when, cometh the hour, cometh the man, that was Seve all over. And there was something about playing the Americans that brought out the absolute best in him. And I think the same with Rahm. I mean, the strange thing is that three of the European side have an American accent. I mean, John Rahm's got a pretty American accent. Ludwig Aberg has got, has basically been schooled in the States, and then Sepp Straka. I think he lives in Texas. So,
Yeah,
and
he definitely, yeah.
he's lived over there for a long time. But there's something about them when they come together about representing Europe, and it can be seen as a cliche. And I know there are certain American fans who get tired of the reference to Seve, but you only had to see the huge sort of flag that was sort of unfurled across
Yeah.
the massive grandstand around the first tee. The fact that the players had Seve's sort of image embroidered underneath their Ryder Cup sort of insignia on their shirts. What happened at Medina? They had Jose Maria Lazabal there, who was this sort of living, the living connection between that era that Seve completely spearheaded, which included the likes of Nick Faldo and Bernard Langer and Sandy Lyle and Ian Woosnam and all those sorts of amazing players. But Lazabal is the bridge, and there were all sorts of things around the Ryder Cup, and I think they even in the team dressing room they had an extra locker for Seve.
Yep.
So I think that I think if it didn't really mean something, there would be a certain element of eye roll amongst the European players. But it really does mean something, even to like
Yeah, I
players.
don't buy into that stuff, that it doesn't mean anything to the players, and like no. It, and like the whole, I think it was a story that somebody put out to gain some recognition, but the whole story about, how Shoffley and Cantlay were, kind of at odds for not getting paid. I'm always on the side of the players getting paid. And the reason is because the Ryder Cup generates an enormous amount of money. And if none of that money is going to the players, then I have a real problem with it, because they're why we tune in. It's always about the players. You can tell me it's tradition, this, that, or the other, but we all tune in to watch the best players hit the most terrific shots. So I'm always, always, always in fan of them getting paid. But I don't think the story was true. I think that those guys, it means something to all of them. And, whether you're an American or a European, I don't know that the fans necessarily get it, but the players definitely do. And anybody that's on one of those players' teams gets it too. I've talked to quite a few coaches this week who are over working with players at the Ryder Cup, and just the text messages I've shared with them has been really cool and insightful, and just the moments that they're having, just being a very small contributing part to that. I mean, it changes everybody's life, right? Like everybody that goes keeps mementos, everybody hangs on to that stuff, and it's the stories you tell your grandchildren. So I definitely think it means a lot to the players.
Yeah, I mean, Patrick Cantlay has obviously been the sort of villain of the piece, amongst European fans, but also probably amongst some American fans as well.
Yeah, they go after the poor guy constantly.
There's been a lot of backlash, but the guy was a rock star. He played really, really well this week, and like anybody who's getting that much stick from that many people, walking off every tee along every fairway, and they're waving hats at him, and he's still there, and he's still battling, and he was still pulling out these clutch shots at clutch times. I find it impossible to believe that it doesn't matter to somebody like that. He might have an issue, like you say, with the amount of money that's being made, for different organizations, and that maybe is not going into his pocket, but they do get $200,000 to donate to a charity of their choice. So they, there is,
which is a tax write-off, right? So let's be honest, like that's the way that you write down your taxes a little bit for people that don't know how you work the system. But like, okay, like, but it's not, that's not why anybody's there, right? And I agree. The one thing I will agree with is Zach Johnson said in one of his press conferences was, people would pay to play in this. And he's absolutely telling the truth, right? Because I think that, as upset as a few of the names are that I mentioned that aren't there, given the opportunity to pay a couple million and be there on Sunday to go out for a singles match, I bet they would have paid it to be there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a totally unique experience. Every single player talks about that. It's unlike anything else. And these, many of them have won major championships. Virtually all of them have won big tournaments. In fact, all of them have. And some of them have sort of Hall of Fame careers. But there is nothing like a Ryder Cup for putting you in that sort of crucible of pressure, to experience pressure, and the pressure of not only performing in front of crowds like that and an atmosphere like that, but for your teammates. And all the players talk about this. So yeah, you can see why.
What I would take away from this Ryder Cup? Here's what I would take away from the American side. If you're a betting man, and I know that the Double D likes to wager a few pounds here and there,
yeah,
I'll tell you what. I think that this was the beginning, and I'm saying it here first on the Making the Turn podcast. I think that this is kind of the beginning of the real coming out party for one Mr. Max Homa. I think he played rock solid. I think that really did a lot to build his confidence. His team that he has around him is impeccable. He works with one Mr. Mark Blackburn. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Mark Blackburn had, I believe, 4 players in the Ryder Cup, which is pretty darn good. And he's got a great team. He seems to be finding a lot of confidence and seems to have maybe found his footing. And I would hate to be having to beat him on a Sunday when it's coming down the stretch with the confidence of what it took for him to make that 7.5 footer to keep it going and to keep the dream alive, because that's what I would be thinking about every competitive tournament the rest of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think the really interesting thing about what he did on 18 is it showed such clear thinking at a time when he had every right for his brain to be completely scrambled, to take the drop, to back himself to get up and down, to assess the situation as it was unfolding. And you're right, he played fantastic golf. He was an undoubted star of the American team. I think that Cantlay deserves a lot of credit as well for
taking the stick and playing that way 100%. But I mean, I just think that when you look at who really stood out, and if you were walking out the gate of the Ryder Cup today and you were like, it was a great show, who do you think we ought to keep an eye on next? Like kind of like you do after a movie, picking an actor that you like. I definitely think that Max Homa is the guy that stood out head and shoulders above everybody else.
He hit a lot of great looking shots, though, didn't he? I mean, he's got a great swing, and actually some of the, seeing the flight of the ball from, down the line, he just seemed to be it was on a rope. He was playing, he just seemed to be striking his irons so well. He seemed to be thinking his way around the golf course well. Very cool under pressure. And I think, like you say, he had a good President's Cup last time out. He's performed really well in a faltering US side. He's proven himself. And now it will be really interesting to see if he can take that next step on in his career. He's already an elite performer. He was, he had a good season. He was probably about 4th or 5th in terms of form coming into the Ryder Cup in the US team. And I think it will now, obviously, the one sort of black mark on his record at the moment, if you like, is his performances in majors. Can he use that experience now to take that away and think, okay, I've actually performed in the harshest crucible of all. I'm going to back myself now, because he's never really done it in a major yet.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to waste that opportunity. I definitely think he's going to learn from this and take it forward. And I just think it would be hard to imagine that the team that he works with would not build around this moving forward. I think
Who
that
who
you kind
who
of have
who do
to.
you think who would you say the same about from Team Europe? I mean, who surprised you from Team Europe? I mean, Bobby, I think it was interesting that Bob McIntyre had a lot of negative press coming in, wasn't playing that well, didn't really have his best stuff, but he was still unbeaten. I don't necessarily think he's going to go on and do something amazing
I think
next
he's going to
season. I'm
have a
really
better
happy
career
for
than he
him.
would have. I think he'll definitely
Yeah.
grow from it, right? And probably go out there and compete at a little higher level. But you're right. I don't think that he's the one. You know, Interestingly enough, and it's the easy answer, when I look at, kind of what is chalk, for the Ryder Cup, John Rahm summoning the spirits of Sevi, like we were talking about, like that seems pretty on brand for John Rahm. Like I don't know that he necessarily takes anything away other than just more kind of lure around the Ryder Cup and what he is as a Ryder Cup player. But I really think that, Rory really surprised a lot of people. And I almost kind of feel like this was kind of him finally letting go of the PGA Tour live battle in regards to, he kind of went through that and then it kind of fizzled out. And then Rory was kind of made to look like, a mouthpiece for the PGA. And it was pretty anticlimactic, really. And Rory never got a chance to even have a rebuttal to that. It was just kind of on to the next news cycle. And then I think that this really Rory is tired of being walked on. You know what I mean? And I don't think that anything that happened on 18 yesterday was really all that absurd. I just think it was the wrong time at the right time, sort of thing, right?
Yeah,
And
I
or the
agree.
wrong thing at the right time. And I think that Rory's frustrations boiled over. But the thing that was impressive, and I don't know, but it would be scary if we got that Rory to show up at the majors. Like
Yeah, I mean,
that Rory that showed up this morning was pissed off and determined and like he wasn't going to get beat. Like
yeah, I
he
mean
that was
to go 4 out of 5, that after what happened at Whistling Straits, there was a lot of pressure on him. Obviously, the question mark about the long major drought continues, and it will come back at when April rolls around and we come around to Augusta, and of course that will start again. But he will put a lot, I think, in the locker from what happened this week. I think you're right about Rahm. I mean, Rahm is on a great trajectory. I think Hovland, no surprises. He played well. He was the most informed player on both sides coming into the tournament, and he
he's
just
the
continued
scariest
that.
player in the world because I don't know, like normally when you look at a guy like Scotty Scheffler, right? Like, he kind of breaks all the rules. His footwork's kind of all over the place. He quote unquote early extends. He just breaks a lot of the rules that instructors think that exist within golf. But, you know, it's easy to point to Scotty and go, well, his putting, especially from short range, can be an Achilles heel, right? Like you could see how he kind of the rails come off and all of a sudden he can't make a 5 footer for a couple months in a row. That would make sense. But when you look at Victor, he first off, he's been a very well-known commodity since college. Okay. Like I know that most Americans are typically late to the story, but Victor's been a very known commodity since he came out of Oklahoma and has just been an absolute flusher ever since he stepped foot on the PGA Tour, and he's been known as that since day one. And the thing is, and it's been very well documented, at a point he was not as good at chipping as he was the other skills. It doesn't mean like he couldn't chip and couldn't. Of course he could. He was on the PGA Tour, but the work he's done with Joe Mayo with his short game and the confidence that he has in that short game. Like this isn't just he's confident and it's working now. Like they actually changed it and now it works for him and he understands how to make it work. And he doesn't do anything amazing. He really doesn't. He hits fairways, he hits greens, he makes putts. And like
Yeah,
when you're just kind of one of those ho hum guys, and he seems to be pretty much, nothing seems to really bother him too much in terms of the added pressure from winning big events. Like, dude, I don't know what's going to beat that guy. Like, I mean, that
yeah,
is
he looks pretty dangerous for next year. I mean, he's just on such a steep upward trajectory. I mean, his chipping was below tour average. We saw that. We looked at his clip data, and
right.
you know, he was below Tiresh, but his trajectory with his short game has been really, really impressive.
I swear he hit
He's
that
now got a really strong short game. It might not be elite yet, but it's certainly better than tour
at
average.
the US Open at Brookline when he hit it into the face of that bunker to lose the Open, right? Like he was coming down the stretch. When he drilled that 6 or 7 iron right into the face of that bunker, and that was essentially the tournament, right? That was it for Victor. I swear, the reason that he tried to even hit that shot was because he didn't have the confidence he has today in his short game. And he was trying to hit a shot there to knock it near or on the green because he didn't want to have to pitch or chip that ball. I swear, and I know that I get it. Like I know he had already made the change with Joe and all that stuff. But at the same time, I would be willing to bet that he would go full Max Homa here, hit a wedge out of that bunker now, lay up, chip up, make the par, and move on instead of trying to
Yeah.
take that shot on, which effectively took him out of that tournament. I think he made a decision there and said, okay, like now I got to start trusting this thing. And I really got to like learn how to do this because under the gun, this is what's separating me from them.
Well, the interesting thing is he's clearly got a growth mindset, hasn't he? He's you know, it's very easy to say, I'm going to take the lessons of a painful defeat, and I think it was PGA, wasn't it, that
Oh,
hit
I'm
that
sorry,
shot?
PGA.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. Yeah, you're right.
You know, he took the lessons from that and he's worked on it. And he's not sort of allowed it to be an anchor around his ankles. You know, he's moved forwards from it. I mean, I think the interesting thing on Team Europe will be players like Hatton and Fleetwood. I mean, both of them are, you know, top 20
Outperformed. Both
top 20
outperformed.
players. Yeah, they're both really good players, but can they now make that breakthrough? Can they now go through that sort of glass ceiling to the next level? I mean, I think it will be Hatton's been knocking on the door for a while. Fleetwood obviously hasn't won in the States, but has had a
I'm
really good season.
in danger of being mean spirited, and I don't want to be. I really I love Terrell Hatton. I think he's amazing, and Tommy Fleetwood as well. But you know, I kind of thought the same thing, Double D, when, you know, obviously Fleetwood became the closer there. I would have liked to have seen Tommy make that 3.5 footer to close it out because I think he would have learned something from that. But I kind of thought to myself about it, you know, did Tommy grow from this? But at the end of the day, you know, I think if Tommy would have had to go out there to win that tournament for Europe and face the pressure knowing that it was going to come down to him for 3 days in a row, I don't necessarily know that Tommy would have showed up the same way. It felt
Yeah,
kind of
and
backdoory. You know what I
I
mean?
think
Like you just
I, th-
happen to
I
be the
think it
random guy.
I think it's an interesting point. I mean, obviously the way he played with Molinari, he was fantastic, and they went 4-0 for the first 2 days. And then he didn't quite have anything left in the tank for the singles. He is a great partner. He's a great team player. He's hugely valued by his teammates. He's a great guy. Everybody loves Tommy Fleetwood. He's got a wonderful swing. He strikes the
Just
ball
don't know if he's
beautifully.
a winner. I just don't know
But
if he's a winner.
I don't think he wins enough for that level of talent and that ball striking ability that he has, which is elite.
I get
But,
in
you know,
trouble for saying this, but there is a level, right? Like there is, you know, certain people have the it factor, the killer mindset, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like Tiger's a winner, and Tiger is not like beloved by all. Like Tiger rubs a lot of people the wrong way because he kind of has that I'm a winner mindset. And generally, like, I mean, I kind of think the same of Sergio. You know, I mean, I thought it was amazing that we just watched a Ryder Cup that didn't have Sergio Garcia, and it didn't have probably Mr. Ryder Cup himself, and we know who that would be, Mr. Ian Poulter, right? Like,
yeah.
think about it. Neither one of those guys were there for Europe, and you didn't even notice. Like, it's unreal. I thought when they announced the changes and those two guys wouldn't be there, like I didn't think it would be the same, but I'll be darned, it really was. But those guys really, I thought it was interesting how it all played out. I really did.
Yeah, it was a great Ryder Cup. I mean, there's nothing like the Ryder Cup. I know that's a cliche, but it is unique. I feel sort of emotionally spent after the last 3 days.
Yeah, it
Just some
would.
incredible,
Imagine having the Solheim Cup with it, though. Imagine
yeah. I
having the
mean,
Solheim Cup with it, man. That would have been so cool.
it was a big opportunity missed, wasn't it? The fact that they had the Solheim Cup and the Ryder Cup in consecutive weeks in Europe, the opportunity to market them together. And I think Stacey Lewis made the point that she'd sort of tried to do outreach to the PGA. She tried to see whether there are opportunities to be able to market the two events together. And I think that, you know, the women's game is on such an amazing uptick at the moment. There are so many great players around. There's
But
such a
you know, in the
field.
States Double D, it was so hard. You like the coverage was on, you know, not on any mainstreams. Like you had to go to Peacock to find the coverage. And then like even trying to find just scoring updates online. I mean, very difficult, even on the LPGA website, which I really that really frustrated me the most was the fact that going to the LPGA website, I still couldn't find like they had some stuff, but I mean, it wasn't like, you know, just give me some live scoring, man. Like, let me know how the matches stand because I'm trying to follow this and I want to be engaged. And that's where I think we really don't hit the mark because you're right. The Ryder Cup's been amazing. I'm emotionally spent, you know, and it's been fun. But what could we tie the golf consumer over with? Well, we could do, you know, Ryder Cup every two, Solheim every two. And dude, it's fun. Like these are fun events, right? So, you know, we could literally get it going to where the guys that like to go and support the men at the Ryder Cup, heck, those people would probably love to go to the Solheim Cup too. And you're going to see the same level of golf. It's not like the women don't play as well as the men. I mean, I thought
Yeah.
the Solheim Cup was amazing. I thought that the European team obviously did an amazing job, but you know, I think honestly, if you look, I know Stacy gets a lot of credit for using analytics as well. But if you look at how the Solheim team, the European Solheim team beat the American team, and you look at how the Ryder Cup teams were beaten, it was a very similar style. The Europeans just
Mm.
really had a more well thought out plan that they executed. Simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, the United States, the access to the golfing world has shifted sort of you know, so strongly towards the United States over the last 15, 20 years, that Europe need to, as we discussed at the outset, they need to explore every opportunity to find an edge. And they did
And they
that very
did.
successfully at the Solheim Cup, and they did that very successfully at the Ryder Cup. And the big test now will be, can they do something that a Ryder Cup team hasn't done for a long time since Medina, which is to win on away soil. And it's going to be very, very tough at Bethpage, as we know. And I think after the atmosphere we've seen in Rome, then the crowds at Bethpage are going to be totally up for it.
Yeah, I think that New York loves a chance to show off when it comes to who's got the craziest fans. You know, it's like the only thing that could be crazier is as soon as it's over, if we went to Boston, because Boston would be sure to one up them. But you know, I mean, when you're talking about the Northeast and you're talking about sports, you're talking about very, very passionate sports fans, people. So I think it'll be great. I hope that it maintains some level of respect. Obviously, you know, as a fan, you know, I've been to a lot of these events, as have you. It's like, yeah, you know, like that is part of the fun, but it's fun to like wave your hat at somebody, right? Like I think that that was kind of a good fun kind of thing with Patrick and the crowd the whole week. But you know, when you start talking about players' wives and stuff like that and shining
Yeah.
lights, and I think that gets a bit disrespectful. And as long as we don't cross that line, you know, I'm all for it because I do think it certainly adds an element to it.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't like, as I said earlier, I don't like hearing voices from the crowd going, hit it in the water, miss it, shank it. You're a cheat. You know, he wasn't a cheat. You know, somebody shouted, "You're a cheat." You know, when he took the drop, when Max Homer took the drop on
Yeah,
18, he wasn't a cheat. He was actually, you know, he had an unplayable lie where he was very likely just going to flub it into the bunker, and he made a really smart choice. And
dude.
actually, that golf fan, if he is indeed a golfer, the guy who shouted cheat would have something to learn from what Max Homer did on the 18th. Actually, to be present and in the moment and think, okay, what is the best course of action here? I mean, it obviously helps when you've got a short game like Max Homer's, but
The shot he hit
yeah,
was incredible. The shot, I
yeah,
mean, the decision, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree with you more. Like as a coach, my heart is singing, right? Like that a player was present and made a good decision and like didn't just go attack that pin and hit it in the water and take themselves out of the hole or whatever the case may be. But the shot that he hit, like because the thing is you know that as soon as he walked up and saw how bad that lie was, and as great as he is at self-regulating, I'm sure your heart rate is still jacked. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like to walk up and to just almost, you know, that there's that thought that crosses your head, I'm done. Right. Like,
yeah.
and you have that moment. And luckily he
I have
snapped
that
out.
on the first tee generally. I have that. I have that as soon as I put a club in my hand. But yeah, no, you're
Yeah.
right. I just
Yeah.
thought there
Yeah.
was. I don't. You know, to your point, I don't. I just think that I hope that it doesn't cross the line with the Ryder Cup. I mean, at times it borders on it, and at times it does cross over. I think that what I've always been proud about being a British golf fan is the way that, you know, visiting players when they come and play in the Open Championship would talk about knowledgeable galleries who would actually
It's
clap
true.
great,
It's all true.
clap great shots that were hit to, you know, they recognize a good shot. The good shot doesn't have to be within 2 foot of the pin. Sometimes it can be finding a green, you know, finding the fat of the green from a really difficult spot in a crosswind. You know, we're talking really here about the Open Championship, and that is a very different vibe to the Ryder Cup. I mean, they're two completely separate things. But I do think that spirit of respect, that spirit of being able to applaud a good shot, even if it's very clear about which team you're supporting and who you're pulling for and who you're rooting for. I just don't. I hope that that doesn't go out of the game entirely, because I don't really appreciate players being booed and stuff like that. I mean, you know, we're watching these
Yeah.
guys. To your point about the players being paid. You know, they are the stars of the show. They are pulling out the most unbelievable golf shots and playing the most unbelievable golf under the most extreme pressure. And that makes for great theatre. And that's why, you know, so many thousands of people travel to Rome. That's why so many millions of people watched it on TV. That's why there's so many billions of comments on social media
We're talking
around,
about it right now, man.
and
I
we're
mean, like
talking
it,
about it.
you're right. You know, I mean, it really is an amazing event. And at the, at the risk of sounding like a traditionalist, you know, I agree. You know, I love, you know, I have a single strap bag. I love carrying it. I like walking, you know. It doesn't mean that I'm against music on the golf course. It doesn't mean I'm against, I played with a gentleman yesterday who played with bare feet. You know, I'm good with that. Like, I'm not against these things. It's just at the end of the day, though, when it comes to these special events, I do hope that we do stay a little bit more with the traditional side of it, and always make sure that we keep respect at the center of the competition, because I really don't like, I mean, I was watching, been a big Colorado football fan this season so far. I really like what Coach Prime's done, but you know, I saw that video come out of kind of how that team, how the Colorado team was acting towards the Oregon team prior to the game. And you know, I don't think I want that for golf. You know, I just, I don't like the ultra macho stuff, the crazy alpha. You know, I don't think golf needs that, because at the end of the day, golf's hard enough just trying to beat the golf course. You add, you know, a person into that. I mean, dude, you got your hands full. So like,
Yeah.
let's just keep it all respect and compete.
Yeah, I mean, I was really disappointed to hear what Brian Harman said, and this is no criticism of Brian Harman after his Open Championship win, and we were at we were at Hoylake together, Dooch,
Yep.
and we watched a lot of golf that week. But I thought he was a fantastic winner. He played lights out golf all week. He lapped the field. He was, you know, clearly the best golfer that week, and just because he isn't necessarily one of these sort of marquee names or these sort of rock stars of the game, that didn't matter to me. I just think you've got to identify the best winner. And actually, there was a guy, I think, on the final day who he had ejected from the crowd, from the galleries, because he was literally on his case and shouting, "Miss it," you know, when
Yeah.
he was pulling
Yeah.
his putter back. And you know what? That I take that. I sort of take that personally, because I'm proud of the fact that British and European, particularly British, you know, golf fans and golf crowds and galleries are knowledgeable, and they like, you know, they appreciate good golf, and they're happy to show that appreciation. And I don't like it when people overstep the mark, or people, you know, besmirch our reputation. And I think that while
Well,
the
the
Ryder Cup
beautiful
is very
thing, right,
different,
is like, for one guy that messed that up, like you're talking about, the gentleman that had to be removed for ribbon, you know. So actually, Double D absolutely saved me. He wasn't there on Sunday, and the weather was really, really terrible on Sunday. So the Double D saved me a bunch and gave me a pass to get into one of the large media centers. So I was in there for a good majority of the front nine, and it was funny because everybody was watching the TVs in this thing, right? And it's packed because the weather's so bad. Everybody's just trying to stay dry and warm. But every time Brian would like miss a shot, or like it wouldn't be, like, go in the hole, everybody would cheer, right? But it
yeah,
was like such a, it wasn't like you suck kind of cheer. It was like everybody was just having good fun, because it was pretty
yeah.
obvious that Brian wasn't going, you know what I mean? And that's fun, right? Like that's what the Ryder Cup should be. Like a good ribbing is fun, but to your point, when you're trying to actually get in the way and make yourself part of the story, that's when I have a problem with it.
Yeah, well, hopefully, you know, I think it was a great Ryder Cup. There's always there's always times when it's, it goes over the margins, or things get a little bit out of hand. But I do think it was a fantastic Ryder Cup. There was amazing passion showed by the crowds, by the players. There was an extremely high level of golf from both teams, particularly Europe, over the first 2 days.
Absolutely.
And even on the final day, there was some fantastic golf. And I think, what you said earlier on about, the players almost having to have their nerve ends singed a bit to actually get back into that competition mode. It almost felt like it was 2 days of Ryder Cup competition that singed the nerve ends of the American team to be able for some of them to come out and play, as well as they did. I mean, Jordan Spieth I think he was like 6 or 7 under or something, and so was Lowry. But Spieth hadn't been there for 2 days, so it was a great Ryder Cup. They invariably are, even if the result hasn't been close for quite some time now. And I think a lot of people wanted a close outcome. We didn't necessarily get one, although it did definitely get squeaky bum time, as they say in the UK, at various times on the final day. But I think 16 and a half, 11 and a half is a fair result. I think is a fair reflection of the disparity between the two teams. I think the way that they prepared, the way that they were set up. I think a 5-point margin probably is an accurate reflection.
Yeah, and I honestly think that, to your point, I think the Americans really rallied around some of the stuff, that was going on in the media and all that. And I'm sure some clarity will come about all that. I'm a big believer in the fact that I really disagree with how the U.S. team was set up in the first place, which led to the captaincy of Zach. But with all that being said, I really think that at some point we really need to look at how we're going to go about doing this, because you're seeing that the Europeans are taking this very seriously. And I think that the US now has to, have a rebuttal for that, obviously, when we get to 25 in New York. So it'll be very interesting, right? I think that it's just one of those things to where, at the end of the day, we need to stop trying to necessarily just, rest on tradition and the fact that, on paper we should win this thing by a mile. And we need to really start thinking about, what are the differentiators, who's going to be on our team, who are going to be the difference makers. And most importantly, I think we really need to start doing what Europe does an amazing job of, which is grooming that next generation, right? Like Justin Rose, as I said earlier, one of my all-time favorite players. And I would say he definitely stepped into that Ian Poulter role, and he was kind of out there and really just did an amazing job, I felt like, of kind of shepherding some of the young players, which you saw, John Rahm doing earlier in the week. And I think that that's smart, right? I think that the Ryder Cup is something very serious for the European team. And as an American, I would really like to see us take it more seriously and put together a better product.
It's something that's very, very important for the European Tour, the DP World Tour, as it's now known. You know, it hasn't. It's really suffered from the so-called strategic alliance. It is very much now a sort of feeder circuit. Success in the Ryder Cup is enormous for it, both in terms of both on a financial basis, but also on a sort of status level. To reaffirm that there are some fantastic players coming out of Europe. Most of them might spend most of their time playing in the United States, but there's a good number of those guys that play a number of events in Europe still as well. And Justin Rose is obviously going to be a Ryder Cup captain in the future. I'd like to see Luke Donald captain again at Bethpage. I think he did a fantastic job. I think it was a return to that sort of level of meticulous, making sure that no stone was left unturned. That approach that Paul McGinley and
He's
others,
super classy too. Super
yeah, he really
classy.
was. He was very classy. I mean, he was always a classy player, wasn't he? I mean, he swung the club beautifully. He always dressed really nicely. He spoke really well. He was just he's a classy individual, and I think he
He
brought
is.
that
He's
into a
kind of
cap.
like, I always tell people I don't really worry about presidents, because, very, very rarely do I think president decisions get to me, by the time they go that far downstream. And, I just, at the end of the day, want my president to be very presidential. I want him to look good on TV and like not offend anybody. Right. So, Luke Donald, I think definitely did that part of it, but obviously had the substance to go with that as well. And I thought that he was really classy. I thought that the way that he answered questions, even though the questions were obviously very American biased. I thought he did a great job of backing up his players and supporting his team. And he did it in a way to where he didn't tear down the Americans to do it. He just found a way to stay classy and above it the whole time, which is no small feat given how high passions obviously run at these things.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about creating a culture and then allowing those players to step into that culture and then succeed and have everything at their disposal to be able to perform and execute, and that's what they did. So I'd love to see Luke Donald
I
have
agree.
given
That'd be
2 more
cool.
years. Yeah. Anyway, Dooch, well, listen, it was a great Ryder Cup. It was great talking to you about it. I feel like, I can't believe it's going to be 2 more years until we have another one. But I just think back finally to what Jordan Spieth said after Whistling Straits. He said, look, this was great. We had a 17-11 win. We gave Europe a massive beatdown, but this is unfinished business. We need to go over to Europe and win in Europe in order for this to really be seen to be a dynasty. And unfortunately, that dynasty for Team USA, that dynasty was exposed as being something of a sham.
Yeah, I just think it really is going to come down to, there's gonna have to be a systematic change. I mean, and that's what I think European team did after Whistling Straits, and I really think that's what the U.S. team is going to have to do as well. And honestly, if we play American golf, right, which is very soft and long and it's very easy to throw at targets, generally chalk wins on that. And I think Whistling Straits is definitely one of those places to where if the wind and the weather doesn't intervene, it's a pretty wide and generous golf course. So I'm not surprised that the Americans had the big win there. But, as we've talked about and as we will talk about down the road, playing golf in Europe is very different than playing golf in the US. And I don't think that many of your top US players spend very much time other than maybe the Open Championships, playing golf in Europe. So I think
Well,
until
here's a
there's a
stat. Here's a
real
stat. Here's a stat for you, Duke. Sorry to jump in.
do it
Of the 12 players, take out Brooks Koepka, who obviously cut his teeth on the European Tour and the Challenge Tour before that.
100%.
Of the remaining 11 players, only 3 of them had ever played a tournament on mainland Europe.
I mean, there you go.
So
Right
you
there.
take out the Scottish Open and take out the Open Championship, both those taking place not on mainland Europe but in the UK.
Yeah.
Only 3 of them had ever played a tournament in mainland Europe, and I think that what the European Tour has done with tournaments being staged in different countries, different temperatures, different climates, it does produce a well-rounded golfer. A golfer is used to
100%
competing,
agreed.
on different terrains and different grass types and different conditions. And, I think that makes for not only a better rounded golfer, but often a better rounded individual. And I think that's what really came out at Marco Simone this week.
I don't disagree at all. I mean, as an American, I want to beat on my chest and scream USA and like shotgun a beer. But at the same time, like, it's just true. I mean, I think the Europeans outclassed us. I think that honestly, I think the American team was beat before they ever showed up. And that's a tough thing to say and swallow as an American who has pride in this. But, my hat's off, man. I think that we were caught with our pants down. I think we thought it was going to be another Whistling Straits, and big bad Ian Poulter and Sergio Garcia aren't there to come out of nowhere to save the European team. So, we're just going to go over there and stomp them. And I think you saw the backbone of Sevi. I'm not sure if it was his spine or the last shirt he wore that they put in that locker, but it was something, man. And Europe just kind of had this quiet determination all week, and it just kind of felt like you never really lost sense of the feeling that they were going to pull it out in the end.
Yeah, amen to that. But anyway,
Well,
listen, Dooch, I'm looking forward to talking. We got a number of guests lined up for reaching the turn, finding the turn.
making the
For
turn.
yeah, we'll cut that.
We'll get there. No, you're fine. No, we do, and you're absolutely right. This has been great. We actually shot another episode as a primer for this whole podcast, but then with the Ryder Cup happening and the results, we just figured that this would be more fun and less about me and Double D, which more people will probably find entertaining. So he is exactly right. And the Making the Turn podcast will be available wherever you get your podcast, as well as YouTube. And we do look forward to having some amazing guests, most of which we actually have already signed up, but we're going to be very secretive and not tell you about. But we're looking forward to debuting some amazing conversations with some amazing people, not necessarily all golf people and not necessarily all people that you know, but generally speaking, we want to make this a very fun conversation for you to listen to and maybe engage you with some topics and people that you haven't heard from before. So as always, it's been a great time having Double D on here with me. I am the Dooch, as I am known when I cross the pond. So we really appreciate
You
you
are the douche.
tuning. I am the Dooch. So thank you so much. Make sure to download this podcast so you never miss your next episode, and head on over to YouTube and subscribe to it there as well. So thanks again. And until next time, keep grinding.
See you, man.